afternoon. This is Leslie Warner. I'm an alumni career coach with Tufts University. Welcome to the Your Elevator Pitch, your 30 and 90-second introduction webinar. A little bit about me. I've been with Alumni Career Services at Tufts for 16 years. And before that, worked primarily as a career coach in a variety of settings, including corporate outplacement. Also spent 5 years at Mass General as an internal HR recruiter. So I have a lot of background and experience working with people, helping them work on their introductions for interviews, for networking, for other situations, building a business, as well as a number of career, more like job changes than career changes for myself, where I needed to be working on my own introductions. Tufts Alumni Career Services has three main goals. One, to present programs like this, including webinars and in-person networking events for all alumni, all schools. And by the way, these programs are taped and recorded, and we do have recordings on our website, which you see the URL up on the screen for this topic, as well as about 6 other topics that you'll see. We have kind of a small library of job search topics. And next Wednesday, we'll be having salary negotiation. If you have to miss it, again, it is recorded and will be recorded again. Second thing we do at Alumni Career Services is foster networking and connections between alumni and students, including a new online resource for alumni to student networking called The Herd. Details are on our website and also the Tufts Alumni website. And we provide individual career coaching services for graduates of arts, sciences, and engineering, grad and undergrad, and the SMFA. Now, for today's webinar, just a little housekeeping. I'll be presenting until about 2:15. And during that time, you can type in your questions any time. You'll see either at the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen options for typing questions to us. Use the one called Q&A, which you may find right there, or you may need to click a More button to see the Q&A. And that will help us. And I'll pause several times to answer those questions. And in addition, I'll allow time for questions at the end. If there are lots of questions, comments, and so on, we'll keep the phone lines open until 2:30. But as always, you sign off whenever you need to. Again, just a reminder, we are recording the webinar. And so that will be available later. So what is the 30 or 90-second introduction? Well, first of all, those are sort of arbitrary time, time amounts that I put in, but we'll talk more about what that is. Some people call it an elevator pitch. In some ways, that's a good capture for what it is. It's a time when you're speaking with someone one-on-one, and you need to tell them who you are, what you're about, what's important about you, and find that out about them as well. And the sort of classic story is that you're in the elevator with the CEO or a top manager of your company that you work at, and this is your chance, that one elevator ride, to tell them a little about yourself. Some people don't like that phrase, elevator pitch, because it sounds kind of salesy, salesman, salesperson. We don't mean it that way. We just mean a way to say what's important about you and what's important in this context with this particular person at this point in time. The 30-second short version might be you're standing up at a networking event, meeting one person. You might be at a professional association meeting, or maybe even a social event. Now, for social, you usually want to keep it shorter and go into more detail if the person is interested or asks you more questions. But it's important to have these different versions ready, because you think about other people in your life, right? You can't help them or connect with them unless you know what's important about them, what's important to them, and what's important to them that could connect with you. So that it's for you too. The more you can have clear language that fits the situation and the person that you're in, the better prepared you'll be to both help others and connect with others, and also achieve your own goals, personal and professional. The 90-second intro, again, sort of an arbitrary number, but a little bit longer, is it could be tell me about yourself in a job interview, right? You're in that job interview and they say, tell me about your background and what brings you here, or tell us about yourself. People are often kind of stymied by that or afraid of it, especially if you haven't prepared. But when you do prepare, it's a real opportunity, again, to select what's important for this person to know about you right now. So obviously that will have a certain focus, and we'll talk about that more for the job interview focus. Slightly different, but also focused, is you're in a one-on-one meeting that's an informational interview, networking meeting, so that you do have a little more time to introduce yourself and your background. So your introduction is one way of having a short answer to kind of these implied questions that the other person might have. Who, or a way of thinking about it is answering these questions. Who are you? What is your value proposition? Meaning, what is it that you do that solves a problem or helps people or helps a company? How do you make some sort of difference? And again, that will depend on your situation and who you're talking to, how you want to frame that. And what do you want this person in this situation at this organization to know about you? What's the most important? And again, that question of importance is partly what's important to you, but also what are that person's needs? What are that person's interests? What are they going to care about or have on the kind of the front burner? Why do you need this intro? Well, we've kind of talked our way around this a little bit so far. You want to have a way to introduce you and what's important about you, and you want it to be brief, interesting, unique, personal, memorable. You want to be able to teach others your talents. You know, what are you good at? What do you want to be known for? And invite conversation and connection. I mentioned this book. This was some years back that Cliff Hakim, a local consultant, wrote, We Are All Self-Employed. And at the time that he was saying that and writing it some years back, that was a relatively new concept, that even if some of us, like me right now, working for Tufts University, have an employer, have what you might call a regular job, not a gig, not part-time, not freelance. Even if you have a regular job like that, you want to think of yourself as self-employed because you're the one that's responsible for your growth, your development, your career path, not the employer. The sort of old school contract or implied contract between worker and employer, you know, you show up, you do a pretty good job, and the employer will take care of you. That's broken, but it's also freeing, right? It gives you have more opportunity, more possibilities out there. There are all kinds of problems in the world and jobs that exist now that didn't exist even 5 years ago, right? And how do you identify those new opportunities to use your talents or make a difference or connect? It's by being able to talk to people in a way that showcases what you can do, what you have done. Again, not we'll talk about this, not in a way that's bragging or inflated or not allowing the other person, right? You'll be able to teach your talents and then draw the other person out about theirs. And one of the common mistakes that people make, and I'm sure you've all heard this, that at social events, it's like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm Joe's neighbor. How are you? Okay, Joe's neighbor. Well, that's a context, but it's doesn't tell me anything else. Or another very common mistake is, I'm a financial analyst, using a job title that's kind of a thud because it can mean so many different things, different contexts, different companies. Or another common mistake is people using a sort of name brand employer, like, oh, I work at Harvard, or I'm at Google. Well, that may be interesting and it may be a part of your brand or of what you want to share, but it's not enough, right? It doesn't tell us anything about you and what you do or what problems you solve or what's meaningful to you. So I'm going to go through several different formats, several different ways of approaching this, because it can seem a little daunting, especially if you want to move beyond just, here are 3 things that are from my resume. I went to this school and I do this job function and I'm here to meet new people, right? Those might be some basic elements, but it's not enough, right? So one format from a book written a few years back by Pam Lassiter called The New Job Security. And again, what she meant by the new job security was then your security is in yourself, your resilience, your ability to communicate with others, to be visible as a problem solver or person with certain competencies, and connect and communicate with other people in a variety of ways. And we're going to talk mostly here about verbal speaking ways. Um, so she talks about one very simple, basic model for a networking situation might be I have over 10 years of experience in blank, or I recently graduated from Tufts with a degree in blank. Then you say, what I particularly enjoy doing is, and you list 3 skills. And then a couple of results or outcomes. And take scripting and practice, because otherwise you get into the weeds and tell a story that may be a great result, but is a little too long for this brief. This is brief. I recently developed webinars so that I can share job search and career management advice for groups of Tufts alumni all around the world, both in real time and recorded. Obviously, I didn't do this just yesterday. It was a few years back, but that's an example. Brief story. And then a question at the end. Again, if it's in this networking, standing up at a networking meeting or a conference, are you aware of any professional service firms like accounting or consulting that might want to grow their business in some new areas, right? This would be a very customized question. And you notice you're not saying, do you know any accounting companies that have job openings for business development, right? Or it's a different way of thinking about it. So a job interview, on the other hand, you have something to help you focus. You don't want to just repeat your resume because it's boring, and also it doesn't really show sort of you, the person, beyond the resume. You look at the job ad, you highlight key words, key competencies, key culture words, think about, which are the most important. And then you're going to go back to what are your top 2 or 3 skills. Maybe you add an additional one that's a personality trait, especially when it's a personality trait that helps make you successful or get outcomes, right? Your unique value proposition, we're back to that. What is it about you that makes you a problem solver or getting results or achieving something? Sometimes it's a unique combination of skills and experience in a couple of different industries. One thing to be careful of there is, just because I am fluent in Serbo-Croatian and have spent time in that part of the world, well, that may be of interest or it may not. It does make me unique, but the employer also has to care, or the person you're talking to, right? In this case, an employer. Personal brand, that's a whole other big topic, but basically what it means is, again, what do you want to be known for? What are the key competencies that stand out about you that you want people to know? What are your values? What are you about in terms of your professional self, which will include aspects of your personal self, right, that are relevant. Achievements and results that are most relevant, education that's relevant and recent. A great example is when I was interviewing for this job at Tufts, I remember very vividly thinking, okay, I did the last time I actually worked in a college career center was many years ago in my graduate internship for my master's in counseling psych. So normally I would not mention in my 90-second tell me about yourself my graduate internship from many years ago because it's not my recent or most high-level experience. But in this case, I did mention it. And I also mentioned briefly that I got the bug. I first got really interested in career career coaching and universities and students and alumni was in a student internship as a peer advisor at Oberlin College when I was an undergrad. And you better believe I'm, not many years ago, I'm not mentioning that undergrad stuff in any other interview ever, but I wanted to bring it up here at Tufts to show, even if it was a long time ago, there was this connection to a university setting. So you think about what's relevant and the problems you love to solve. And at the end of that job interview format, it's going to say, and now I'd like to, or something that links it back to, that's why I'm so excited to be here talking to you about X, to combine my this and my that, or whatever it is. So you see, it takes little work to customize it to, but you have all these clues to help you, the person you'll be speaking with, the specific company, their specific challenges and needs right now in the marketplace, in the competitive landscape, and also what they've put in the job ad. And you may decide that some of your great points and that you come up with for this don't fit in quite the time frame that you want, so you sort of park them for making sure you find a way to include them later in the interview. So how to create this intro. I'm giving you a couple of different approaches, and I'm going to share a more detailed one in a couple of minutes. Supposedly, now the internet, getting attributions for quotes on the internet can be really funny because sometimes the most common attribution you see is wrong. But according to the internet, Abraham Lincoln said, if I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 hours sharpening my axe. What I mean by that here is common mistake is people not really preparing this kind of introduction carefully and thoughtfully. Maybe they're an extrovert who feels like, oh, I'm comfortable talking with people. This would be my end of the mistake aisle. I'm very comfortable talking with people. I can ask them questions about their work, and I'll just wing it when I'm talking about my work and my goals. Well, yes, I'll have things to say, but are they strategic? Are they inviting the conversations I most want to invite? Maybe not. Or sometimes introverts are relieved to hear they can do really, really well at this because the practice and the preparation really pays off. You read some articles or books on networking and interviewing and the elevator pitch. You think and plan about what you want to say. You write it down, you practice out loud, record it, get feedback, practice with another person, because it really needs to be conversational and personable in tone, not sound like it was written and not memorized precisely like a robot, because most of us sound bad when we memorize because we're not actors. Now, enthusiasm or skills, who gets hired? That's a little bit of a false dichotomy, right? If you need to have most, not necessarily 100%, but most of the competencies that they're looking for in a job ad. But let's assume you have that 70 to 80% and you have the core competencies covered. Then the person that hasn't prepared, hasn't thought about what they want to say and how and why they want to say it that way, to connect with the needs of the employer, it's harder for that person to communicate the enthusiasm. Right? But if you're a person with a quiet or reserved style, you can communicate enthusiasm by the quality of your research and the quality of your preparation, that you're speaking thoughtfully based on research that you and preparation that you did. And when there have been surveys done and research done, really does tilt towards the enthusiasm. Again, you have to have the core competencies, but then if you're able to show preparation, research, and commitment in how you've prepared and how you present, it does make you stand out. So keeping in mind, you want to think about who you're talking to, a specific person. It helps, right? If you can look them up on LinkedIn ahead of time, like for an interview, you often can. In a networking or conference situation, sort of a group event situation, you can't necessarily know the specific person, although you might. It's more, what types of people, what industries, what level, what types of concerns, what are they interested in, who your likely competitors are. That's for an interview or a competitive situation. Why do you do what you do? Not just here's the what of my resume, but what's my why? And what do you bring that your competitors do not? And one way to think about that is what we call your market differentiator. Again, not to sound like a salesperson, but if you think about you and your competition, what do you bring that's different from other people that might be applying for this job and that will be interesting or potentially interesting to this employer, right? And again, that may be a unique combination of skills or industries you've worked in, or it may be a personality trait. If it's a trait, you need to think about how you can talk about it in a way that links it to outcomes and goals, right? If it sounds boring, this intro that you're writing, go back to think about what do you love about your work? What are you really proud of? And free write, write really quickly answers to those questions. I love da 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 da. I'm proud of da 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 da. Or speak into a device to record this brainstorm. And you will find you can't, cut and print that precisely for a professional intro, but you can definitely use words and phrases from it. Now, here's a practical, detailed approach. And before I look at it, I'm going to check to see if we have questions. Yeah, no questions yet? No. Okay. So this is, again, just a different way to approach this exact thing that we've been talking about. How do I write? What do I think about? What do I do to get a well-written introduction that fits me and this situation? So another way is start with a blank piece of paper, number from 1 to 10, and fill in the most important pieces of information you want to communicate about you or your service, your product, your company, if that's what you're pitching. What do you do? What have you achieved? What are your goals? What are you the most proud of, interested in, excited by? So again, don't worry so much about specific categories of information. Just figure some of these are going to be skills, some of these are going to be experience or background points, some are going to be achievements. So just write them all down, bring this number 1 to 10 list, thinking about, again, a specific person, specific time or place that you're going to be communicating with this person, or type of person if it's more like a conference or event. Then take a different color pen and edit. Take out business jargon, edit for clarity. Now, you can include field-specific technical words if your audience will instantly understand them. That's fine. Quantify if you can. So it's not just, I'm great at training, but my trainings get consistently high marks from attendees for fun and learning outcomes. Now, get 5 index cards. And I personally like to write big, so I like the 5x8 cards, but they can be 3x5. Who I am, what I do, how I do it, why I do it, and who I do it for. And then you go back to your list of 10 and take each of those 1 to 10 items and put it onto the card where it best fits. Then organize the cards in a logical order, thinking about what's most important. Put the important things first. So you're shuffling the cards around. Then you think about an attention getter. Is there an interesting fact or statistic to use at the beginning of your intro? Something that could immediately be engaging, make the person want to learn more. Is it a theme about you? Is it a fact or statistic about your field or the problems and challenges you work on? That might take a little research to dig up. So for example, in the field of career coaching, career management, I know there are all kinds of great facts and statistics out there. It would be a question of like, which one would I pick and how would I want to frame it or use it? One way to frame it is to say something like, did you know that organizations where salary information is shared openly between staff see lower paid workers' wages going up or something like that? I mean, that might not be if I were going to use something about wages and transparency, it would have to be when I was talking to not just a general career management person, but say somebody in HR or senior management who's going to be thinking about those kinds of policies, right? So think about not just something interesting or eye-catching, but relevant to the person and the work you might collaborate with them on or do. Then practice. Say it out loud, say it to other people, and ask for detailed constructive feedback. What do they remember from what you say? What stands out? Does anything seem not clear? Are there things that make them feel like, wow, I want to know more about that, right? You want different kinds of feedback. Now record it. Again, listen to your tone, your pacing, and practice in the real world. And the key here is there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all canned speech. It's going to be tailored somewhat to different situation, whether it's a conference you're going to or a more broad event that's going to have a lot of different kinds of people there, or possibly a one-on-one meeting. This list with the how-tos and the steps is adapted from an article called How to Nail Your Elevator Pitch from themuse.com. Themuse.com has a lot of excellent articles and resources. And this one I really liked because it has a step-by-step approach that some people find helpful when they're sort of grappling with this. So as I said, I presented a few different ways of thinking about it and approaching it. So these are just to give you ideas of how other people, writers and thinkers, have thought about this, have approached it. Your approach will need to fit you and also your industry. Here's a real example, came from one of the articles I read. Brief. I'm a lawyer with the government based out of DC. I grew up in Ohio, though, and I'm looking to relocate closer to my roots. I specialize in labor law and worked for an ABC firm before joining the government. So you can see here the grew up in Ohio, relevant because wants to get back there. So this you'd add something at the end to customize what kind of information or contacts or ideas or resources you're looking for, right? And you can see how research will help. Like, let's say this is a person talking to a bunch of attorneys at a meeting in Ohio, a professional meeting or conference gathering of attorneys in Ohio. He or she could say, oh, I've been researching some of the local professional legal, attorney associations. Is there one that you found the most useful, the most interesting, right? So just asking, you don't want to ask, ideally, you don't want to ask people things you can easily find on the internet. On the internet, you can find out what those local law organizations are. And this is the person you can ask. Okay, which one do you like? Here's a longer one. She says, hi, I'm Pam Tone. I'm a graphic designer. Did you know it takes the average person just 2 seconds to look at a company logo and decide if they like it? Right? That's that hook. That's that interesting fact. Did you know that a badly designed logo can do irreversible damage to a company brand? And most companies go through at least 3 or 4 versions in a single year before settling on their final design, costing both time and money. Having worked for over 10 years as a professional graphic designer specializing in brand identification means I've built my reputation on the longevity of my logo designs. I can say not only are my clients happy with what I've done for them, but my designs have gone on to win national and international logo and branding awards. I've worked hand in hand with some of the biggest ad agencies, and out of over 300 contracts, have had only one logo changed. And that was as a result of a merger, not poor design. I'd like to bring that award-winning history to your company. Would you be willing to meet with me for 20 minutes to go over my portfolio and see how I can help make sure your logo properly reflects your brand? So a couple of things here. This is long, but this is clearly, she is literally making a pitch. I'd like to do work for you. Here's my track record. Here's the problem I solve. some sort of key awards I've won, but not just awards, right? Real world, 300 only had one logo changed. If I were, and she's got to be talking to the right person here, right? If I were the person who thought about logo at my company, yeah, this would catch my attention. And if I was busy and we had just redone our logo, I'd be like, yeah, right, why don't you email me your info? Maybe I wouldn't meet with her. But again, for something this detailed and long, you have to be sure you're talking to the right person, right? Otherwise, she would have a shorter version if she was working on helping to identify who the right person is. But she's got the right person. So hers is from a website called theinterviewguys.com. And it's in some ways an annoying website because they're hard selling for their products and services, but they do have free examples and some interesting information, like the Pam Tone sample, which I thought was an interesting use of the kinds of skills and data points that we talked about in that how to do it example. So I'm definitely not telling you to go pay the interview guy's website for things. You're welcome to if you desire to. I'm just saying they do have sometimes these websites for resume or other resources can have really interesting and helpful samples, and you don't have to pay for anything additional. So we talked a little bit about if you're perhaps on the introverted or more quieter side, really focusing on your strengths, research, careful preparation will really help you shine here. The stretch may be to initiate the talk about your skills and goals, as well as practicing how to ask questions of the other person. Extroverts, it's, you use that improvising on the moment when needed, but definitely schedule in time for preparation and thoughtful strategic plan for what you're going to say and how, because we extroverts do get mixed results when we may be memorable for energy and interesting questions we ask, but we also want to be remembered for who do we help, what do we help them with, right? What problem do you solve? So take some time to sharpen your saw, right? To prepare, to think, to practice, and also some time to observe what others do. How do they introduce themselves? What works? What doesn't? You will see a lot of people not doing it very strategically or thoughtfully, right? A lot of people, as I say, rely on this is my job title and this is where I work. And it's not that that's wrong or bad, it's just sometimes it's not effective. Like for financial analyst, or sometimes the job titles are things like, senior analyst 3 or something like that. Well, what are you analyzing? And why do you put the 3 in there, right? It's not that useful. Just a quick side note, this is something to think about for your LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn defaults to, for your headline, your job title and company. If that communicates clearly the problems you solve, who you help, and what you help them with, great, no worries. But for many of us, it's more helpful to think again, what are 2 or 3 key points or facts or things we could put in there to say, here are the competencies I have. Here's who I help and what I help them with. And then as you're practicing, as you're trying different introductions, see what results you get as you change it up. Whenever you try something new, right, it won't always work out exactly as you wish in every situation, but especially when you tune in and notice what other people are doing, you may notice, for example, some people who are effective at this may do a very brief intro, the very brief first introduction, if they're in like a stand-up conversation at a convention or a conference, but then maybe they're very good at drawing out the other person and bringing the conversation around to things that they care about and finding out what the other person cares about. I have tips on that in my networking webinar, which is recorded on the website. We talk about You can have an agenda where you, separate from your intro, you have an agenda where you think, what am I looking to give or share, or knowledge area or resource that I can talk to people about, or a hobby that I'm excited about that I might want to talk about. And then what are you looking to gain or learn? So this is beyond the introduction. So you may see people who don't necessarily have the most whiz-bang introduction, but they are really good at strategic conversation to draw people out to find out what's important to you. What brings you to this conference? What are you hoping to learn from it? And sharing your own goals um, as a way of getting the connections and conversations that you want to happen. So before I talk about the resources, I'll check again to see if we have questions. No questions yet. And that's fine. Sometimes people are listening quietly at work, doing a little multitasking. The Tufts online community alumni directory. This is a resource of Tufts emails of alumni. Your email is in there. All alumni are in this directory, but your email is only in if you have physically typed it in. So it doesn't update automatically from any resource. It's password protected. It's only for alumni. So that's a great resource when you've identified some people, perhaps through using LinkedIn, a Tufts alum that you'd like to speak to learn more about their company, right, for that informational interviewing. Or there's a job opening at their company and you're applying and you'd like to talk to some more people who either work there currently or, another overlooked resource, people who left the company not that long ago, right? Sometimes they're willing to be even more honest about culture issues or challenges that the company may be facing. So LinkedIn can be one way to communicate with people and connect with people, but sometimes in this sort of crazy world we're in where people get way too much email, they're on different platforms. If they're not active on LinkedIn and don't respond, go to the online community, alumni directory, see if they have a direct email there, and then you can craft a really good subject line. Recent grad with public health career questions, whatever is relevant. Recent Tufts grad, right? You want to put the Tufts part or jumbo if that applies. For tell me about myself, tell me about yourself. Books on interviewing from Public Library or Amazon will have samples and strategies for approaching the tell me about yourself in the interview. For more of a networking elevator pitch situation, books on networking, again, will often have tips and samples, as well as I said, articles on themuse.com. This book, Interviewing and Salary Negotiation, I really like Kate Wendelton. She has her own worksheets for your 2-minute pitch. In some ways, it's similar to my 8-step process, writing down the 10 things on the page. It's a classic. Her books do not cover social media. They're sort of earlier time frame, but some of the parts and pieces of communicating and job search are just human communication and not related to social media. So, hers wouldn't be the only books you would use in your entire career management toolkit, but I really like them for some of their just straight shooting and clear articulation of what you're doing and why and how to execute it. Another book of hers that I'll just mention briefly because I just love it. The title is called Shortcut Your Job Search. But what it's about is using writing letters, writing emails directly to the people you want to work for or learn from, but also to directly pitch to work for as a job search method, which we also call target marketing. Why I smile when I say it is if you do a target marketing or this type of letter or email directly to the person you want to work for, especially if they're not advertising for anything, right? They're not posting a job for you. To do it effectively takes thoughtful research, careful thinking, and really good writing. It's not like poetry or great literature, but it has to be succinct and to the point, and yet detailed enough to show, here's why I'd like to talk to you. Here's how it could be helpful to you. Um, so she has great examples. It does take time. It's not a shortcut in terms of not taking in being able to execute it well super quickly. Another resource, and I realize we're straying a little bit off of introductions, but another resource I just wanted to mention is called, if you Google for pain letter, write a pain letter instead of a cover letter. That's another writer, but who has a similar viewpoint, saying you write stressing what is the pain point of this manager that you're writing to for a cover letter or a target marketing letter, and what do you bring that relieves that pain, right? That solves that problem or at least makes a dent in it. It's gutsy move because if let's say the job ad has 14 things in it, you're going to focus on one or two that you think are the most important. So it's not the only way. It doesn't work for everyone all the time, but I like to highlight things like that to sort of change people's thinking, get you to consider different approaches. I also love Why Should Extroverts Make All the Money, which last I checked was out of print. But sometimes you can find out of print things in libraries or used on Amazon. It's not just for introverts, but again, she has excellent examples for introductions that are vivid, are personal, yet still appropriate and professional. Um, how to make it sort of lifted above, here are my 3 skills and here are my 2 results, right? To really make it a personal communication. And again, she's not the only one. These are just ones I happen to be familiar with. Make Your Contacts Count and Strategic Connections are both by Ann Baber and Lynne Wayman. They are terrific. Not focused so much on your, showing sample pitches or elevator pitches, but more about connecting, building networks, this idea about, preparing your agenda before you go to a meeting or conference or professional association that I got from Make Your Contacts Count. They're also the ones that they do have a great piece for your brief intro where they're talking about, again, who do you help and what do you help them with, to sort of take you away from job title jargon or job titles that aren't that meaningful. The new elevator pitch, Chris Westphal, at a few years back, he was this thing that I didn't even know existed, the National Elevator Pitch Champion. And he has some really interesting ideas too. He talks about thinking about not just what is the pain point of this person you're talking to, but who is their primary customer? Who are they primarily worried about, serving, accountable to? And then you pitch to them about how they can satisfy that person, right? Who is your person's customer, primary customer? And it's a really interesting approach because let's say you're selling, he has this example, if you're selling textbooks, well, you are not the actual user of the textbook is the 5th grader, right? Or the high schooler, it's the student, but they are not the one who buys it, right? And in many systems, the teachers are not the ones who make the purchase decision for a textbook. It's done by a curriculum director or a system-wide purchaser or deciding person. So it's thinking about, who am I talking to? Okay, if I'm talking to this system-wide curriculum and textbook decider person, well, yes, they're the person I'm speaking to, but the end users are teachers and students. So how do you craft your pitch with those people's needs and how that person, that decider person, is going to be accountable to those people? It sounds more complicated than it is, and he But again, it sort of fits in with that pain point piece. What problems are you solving? But you're thinking about, okay, who's got the problem and what are their concerns from their point of view. He also makes a great point about how important it is to stay away from jargon, because he tells a story on himself that a young woman heard about him and his services and called him up thinking she might hire him. And he started into his little pitch and just said, I'm the elevator pitch champion and I blah, blah, blah. And when he wound down, it wasn't that long, but when he stopped, she said, oh, well, what is an elevator pitch? And he realized, whoa, he had gotten so far into this world of career management and business people who use that language and talk that way that he lost sight of the fact that this was a customer who was younger and not coming from either of those worlds yet. And it does not work if you're using a word or a phrase that is not immediately clear with whoever you're speaking to. So he told a good story on himself. Like I said, video is great. You can find some interesting people on YouTube. Sometimes some of these authors will do YouTube videos as a way to give examples of what they're talking about. The other article I wanted to mention that I'm not sure if it's still on I should look and see if it's still live on the web, but it was a few years back and it had a great title. Could your sister explain what you do for $1 million? Or, and I just love that. It was in the format of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And it showed this woman like, well, she does something, with real estate and development. And, she was like fumbling around. And sure, your best friend and family members, best friends and family members, you need to help them have clear, simple language about who you help and what you help them with, so that they can expand your reach, right? So then your brand, if you will, and your talents can be known more broadly, but not if they just sort of know, well, it's something with finance or it's something with real estate. And sometimes we neglect that and don't make sure that our close friends and family members know they may not be strategically situated in your industry, but they can help tell your story too, as long as they know a few key facts, a few key points that they're comfortable saying. Oops, that's the end of the slideshow, but I wanted to yeah, I just wanted to mention another quick story about how important it is to be prepared with different versions of the short pitch, right? Where, so that if you're in a social situation or a sort of social slash business situation, you're ready. And this is a true story that happened to a client of a friend of mine, a colleague. The woman was in line waiting to rent a boat. I think it was like Boston Sailing Club, where, once you've proven that you have the skills and you have the basic competencies to manage the boat, the right number of people, you can rent a boat for the afternoon and it's not too expensive. So it's a pretty diverse range of people. So she's waiting in line, and the man behind her was chatting with his friend, and she happened to overhear, something about his name, his company, anyway, enough clues so she realized, oh, this is so and so. He's a manager at a company I would love to work for. I would love to work directly for him at his company. But here I am in my, scruffy boat shoes and my old jeans and sweatshirt. And she felt inhibited about talking to him, about wanting to connect with him professionally and speak with him later, because partly because of how she was dressed and not in that mode, and partly because she was shy about, she didn't want to intrude on his weekend time. She didn't want to be pushy. She didn't want to be rude. So she clammed up. And what I would suggest is, and what her coach talked with her about later is, you be ready with something brief so that you have a way to comfortably and briefly introduce yourself and say, I realize we're here waiting in line for our boats. This isn't really the time or place, but I'd love to follow up with you later to chat more about your company and how we might be able to connect. And it's great if you carry around, I know business cards in some circles are kind of passé because they use paper and they're not the most technological, way to share contact info, but business cards are helpful, or personal cards with your personal contact info, whatever is appropriate to your situation. Because at a time like this, you can just give somebody one and you can ask them, what's your contact info, and you can jot it down on the back of one of yours. So just a suggestion and a pep talk about, being ready to tell your story, and you just never know where that person might be. Sometimes they don't come in the guise that you might expect. The other reason to be ready to tell your story is the person might be this is another true story that happened to an acquaintance. They rode the ferry to, I believe, Martha's Vineyard pretty regularly. And so they knew the ferry staff people, not just the captain, but the rest of the staff who helped the ferry get, hooked up to the dock and help drive it and keep it clean and so on. And they happened to be in a situation where the ferry staff person was like, well, how come you're going over on a Wednesday? Usually we don't see you till Friday. And again, he felt embarrassed. He didn't want to say that he was out of work or in between jobs, but somehow the information came out, and what kind of people he wanted to be or companies he wanted to connect with. And the ferry staff person said, oh, so and so who's standing right over there, he comes every week and he works at such and such company. And so that ended up being the connection that ended up getting him the job. So sometimes it's the strategic person who is the manager you want to work for that's next to you in line at the renting a boat, but other times it's a person that may not seem so strategic. They work for the transportation company or the oil company or something else where they come into contact with um, a lot of different kinds of people. And well, you also don't know who people's relatives are, right? So you don't make assumptions about when and where your story or your information might be useful or interesting or even helpful to another person. So that's my quick take on that. Let's see if we had any questions come in. Well, if there are no questions, then we'll end a few minutes early. And again, go forth and practice, try a few new things, listen to how other people are introducing themselves and having these conversations, beginning these conversations. And good luck with your next steps. Take care.